and a bookshop and a haberdashery. That word. Hello my loves, and thank you for joining me. It's Kirsten, and today we're doing a video that you all voted on, which is some cozy fantasy book recommendations. So I am breaking this video down into a few different parts. We're going to be starting off with some really popular cozy fantasy books, then we're going to talk about some ones that are a bit more underrated, then some ones which not everyone would class as cozy fantasy, but I do, and then a couple books that are on my to want to read list that also think will fit this cozy fantasy vibe. I will of course tell you what these books are about and why I think they're cozy, but I think that's enough introduction. Let's get straight into these books. Starting off with the most popular cozy fantasy book there is at the minute, which is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. If you thought this book wasn't going to be on this list, then I'm sorry, but this is the perfect rendition of what cozy fantasy is. It even says on the cover that it's a low stakes fantasy book. This one we are following Viv, who is an orc, and she has retired from her fighting ways to open up a coffee shop, and this book is just perfect for that. There really isn't much stakes in this, not a lot happens, and what does happen is a bit predictable, and you know it's all going to end up okay because it's a cozy fantasy book. But the depictions of the coffee is absolutely amazing. I adored it so much. It was perfect, absolutely perfect. The smells, the taste, everything, especially when Viv's trying to open up a coffee shop in a place that's never even heard of coffee. So convincing people what it actually is, seeing her try to describe it is absolutely fantastic. It's hilarious. I like the fact that it's repeatedly referred to as bean water, which doesn't sound appetizing at all, but it's just so good. It's so much fun. And then eventually it progresses more into baked goods as well, and again those depictions of a cinnamon swirl, oh god, every time I picked this book up all I wanted to do was have a hot drink and a cinnamon swirl because it was that good. I adored it for that. It was fantastic. But also what adds to the coziness of this is not just that atmosphere of the coffee shop and all the vibes that go along with that, but also the found family trope that is in here. We end up with a barista, a baker, and someone that's kind of like their handy dandy repairman, and they become a quartet of this tight-knit family that's kind of found themselves, as well as a massive cat-like thing that just randomly appears every so often. But it works really well. You get to see those friendships grow. You see how Viv feels really awkward in that at first because she is this massive orc, and orcs are only known for fighting, and how she feels very awkward with trying to give that up and trying to convince people that that's what she's trying to do. And I love it. I love this book so much for that found family, perfect atmosphere. It really is a low stakes fantasy. So yeah, I loved it. Fantastic. A new fantasy book that I think is going to become a lot of people's cozy fantasy recommendation is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. This is by Heather Fawcett, and I finished this literally 2 days ago. I loved it. It was so good. It's cozy in a different way. So we are following Emily. She's trying to put together this encyclopedia of fairies, trying to document all the different fairy types. It's the first encyclopedia that there will ever be, and it's going to give her a lot of prestige in the university where she teaches at Cambridge. So she's off into this remote town to document this type of fae that's never been recorded. She's a funny character as well, like she doesn't interact very well with people, and that awkwardness that comes about is really interesting. And again, you get almost that found family towards the end of it because the village and everyone all comes together, and I like that. I think found family is definitely a main thing for me when it comes to like adding a cozy factor to it, is finding that. But alongside that you do have the setting. This time it is a wintry setting, but it was done so well. So even though it's cold and bleak and frozen, the descriptions of it still made you feel so cozy, especially as where Emily is staying, her academic rival Wendell decides to make an appearance, and he kind of takes over where she's staying and turns it into this cozy home place rather than just this barn that she was staying in. And I loved that. I loved seeing that grow, and again those depictions in the end made it feel like somewhere that you really would just want to curl up reading a book with a hot drink, where it's freezing cold and blizzards outside, but inside it's just this warm coziness. I think it was done really well. And then alongside that you do have the plot line of trying to find out about the fairies in this fantasy world. There is a bit more of a plot to it than Legends and Lattes, but I think if you like a bit more of a plot and a little bit more of a stakes, then you can enjoy that. But also it's not strictly all plot, like you get a lot of the characters felt in this, and I think again that's what makes a cozy fantasy, is that connection to your characters as well as that cozy setting. So yeah, it just worked. I really loved the banter between Wendell and Emily, and I just liked the way that this all came about. I have seen some people, like Abby, she spoke about this book, she did a review for it, and she said it's basically light academia, which I think is a perfect way to describe it. She said it's cottagecore / light academia. She doesn't quite see it as the cozy fantasy because she thinks there are too many stakes in it. I think it could be argued that this could also be a cozy fantasy, and I have seen a few other people see it that way. I know I definitely do, but I do think light academia is definitely a good way to classify this as well. And the other popular book that I normally see when it comes to cozy fantasy is The House in the Ceruleancy by T.J. Klune, and I 100% agree. This is so lovely, and again it's got that found family trope that it just screams coziness to me. So we're following Linus. Linus works for extremely upper management, and he goes to different children's homes to rank how they are looking after the children, how it all works. These children are unique. They have different magical abilities, and he does such a good job of it that extremely upper management decide to send him to the house in the Cerulean Sea. But it's a house that's a bit more dangerous than all the other ones that he's gone to, and he's very nervous, very apprehensive. But you see him really connect to the people that are here. You see him start to stand up for these children and start to fight against the prejudices, and I loved it. It was so good, and you're really seeing how these children have been treated harshly by the villagers because they are different, and because of their expectations and preconceived notions of how these children are going to be, rather than actually getting to know them. I really enjoyed this one. It's such a lovely, light-hearted book. And again, it's got a little bit of stakes there, but I would say it's more like Legends and Lattes, where the stakes aren't really that high. It's just a really lovely, heartwarming book. So yeah, I would definitely say that this is another really good cozy fantasy. Again, on the more popular side, but I do think it is a good one. Getting into the more lesser talked about cozy fantasies, this one I wouldn't say is strictly lesser, but it's definitely not one of the newer ones, and that is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is a classic fantasy book, and I will admit I didn't love it when I read this one. I listened to it on audiobook. It was narrated by Andy Serkis, which I highly recommend. I loved his narration of this. But I can argue that even though I didn't fall in love with this book, it is cozy fantasy. We're following Bilbo Baggins, who is a hobbit, and you get these beautiful descriptions of like where he lives, and he goes on this adventure with some dwarfs, and it goes on from there. There are songs in it, you get the banter between them all. I liked it for that, and it's something that I think hobbits you can't help but associate with cozy fantasy, in my opinion. So that's why I do think The Hobbit is the classic, it's the original cozy fantasy. This one was actually written for children to enjoy, which I think is why it gets that more cozy, warm-hearted vibe to it than compared to the other books. I'm saying that without having read the other books, I'm basing that off the films, but I will be reading them soon. But yeah, I just think it does work for this cozy fantasy if you're looking for a more classic version of the cozy fantasy. As I say, it wasn't particularly my favourite, but I don't want to recommend just books that I've enjoyed. I do want to recommend a book that I know does tick that box, even if I didn't love it as much. But yeah, I do think that The Hobbit works for that, but I feel like I've repeated myself. So I'm going to move on to a few other ones which I think are underrated. So first of all, we have The Pig in the Derby Hat by M.A. Knights. This is a great little novella. It's only 39 pages long, but it's got that cozy factor down. We're following Clementine, and Clementine lives with her parents. They run a bakery, and her grandmother's actually been very ill. Sorry if you can hear some dogs going, it's the neighbour's dog. She then stumbles into someone called Mr. Gout, and he then takes an interest in what's happening with her grandmother, and they realise that there are supernatural things going on. It is so cozy and funny and heartwarming, and I really enjoyed it. Even though it's such a short book, a lot does happen in it, but it doesn't feel rushed at any point. It feels really well founded, and this is a book that I recommend you can just read in one sitting with a nice hot cup of tea and just relax and ignore the world while you read this one and just get those cozy, warm vibes, especially because it's in a bakery as well. I don't know, there's something about that that really does lend to a cozy setting for me. So yeah, I would highly recommend this one. It's not one that I've ever seen anyone talking about. I found it because of TikTok. The author is actually on TikTok, and he was talking about how he writes cozy fantasy, and so I decided to get the ebook version. I loved it so much that I wanted a physical copy that I can annotate and reread whenever I'm feeling that need for a cozy little pickup. Another book that I don't see anyone talking about is The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Patrick Rothfuss. I love this book so much. So this is technically a companion novel to The Name of the Wind, which is his first book in a trilogy. The third book, we've been waiting a long time. I don't think it's ever going to come out, but it is an amazing trilogy. However, this book, we're just focusing on one of the side characters in there, and she's called Ori, or well, the name is given to her, so it's kind of a weird one to explain because I don't want to explain the first book. I personally think you don't need to read the first book to read this one, because this is literally just following a few days in Ori's life and where she lives and what she does. It's really quite cozy, the way that she goes around things. There is no plot to this at all. It's all about just this character, and I really enjoy this book. I don't see anyone talking about it, as I've mentioned. There are also illustrations in this book, which I really enjoyed that element to it. When Patrick Rothfuss first wrote this book, he sent it off thinking that no one was actually going to pick it up and that people wouldn't want it, but then his editor was like, no, we need this book, we're going to run with it. And I'm so glad they did, because it's just so quaint and beautiful seeing Ori in this world and seeing how she deals with things is just lovely. You don't need to have read the first book to read this one. It's just giving you insight into who she is. There's a couple of things that allude to the main character in the first book, but so brief that again I don't think you need to have read it. I think this is a nice one if you want to try Patrick Rothfuss writing before you commit to the first two books, especially knowing that you've got that wait for the third book. But even if you just wanted to read this on its own, I think you could do that easily. But I love this one, and I don't see enough people talking about it. It's just something so quaint and lovely about it that I can't quite describe very well, but it's really lovely. And this is a book that I do go to when I'm wanting that feel for beautiful writing and a character that is just so lovely and endearing, and just seeing the unique way she views things is lovely. Another cozy fantasy, we've got Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. I would actually argue that any of Margaret Rogerson books would be good for this because they are all quite low stakes. This one I would say is probably the coziest though. This one we're following a main character who is an amazing artist, and she attracts the attention of the Fae. Again, these aren't Fae, don't think like Disney-fied version or Sarah de Mars. We're talking proper Fae, that folklore vibe to it. So she captures the attention of this Fae king, or is it Fae prince? But she does something that she shouldn't have done, which is paint humanity into his eyes. As a result, she is then taken to account for her actions in some sort of tribunal basically. And it's hilarious on the way, it's so light-hearted, it's funny, there are moments that make me laugh out loud with this book. There's one particular scene that I always remember, and that's our main character is telling the Fae prince that's taken her that she's really hungry, and they can't lie, and so they believe everything that she's saying is 100% the truth. And so she says to him, oh, if I don't eat, I'm gonna die. And so then he goes rushing off like, oh my god, don't die, I will get you food. And it's hilarious. I love that scene. Every time I think about this book, I think about that scene. It was just so good. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was absolutely lovely, and again, it's a nice little short one that you can just sit down and read in a couple of sit-ins. And yeah, I love the scene of it. Also the setting, it's very autumnal vibes. I do think cozy fantasy is a good time when it's like you've got that autumn winter feeling going on, and then you can have a nice hot drink while you're reading about it. But yeah, beautiful descriptions in this, because our main character is an artist, so she sees everything with an artist's eye, so you get beautiful descriptions of the scenery and the colours, and everything is just so vibrant and lovely. So yeah, this is one that when it first came out, a lot of people were talking about, but I don't see as many people talking about it now, and I do think this does the job of cozy fantasy very well. Okay, the last 3 books are books that I class as cozy fantasy, but others may not. That's absolutely fine, because everyone has their own different opinions. But let me go through these 3 books. So first of all, we have Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. This to me feels cozy fantasy. There is more stakes and more things going on in this, but it is lovely and whimsical, and that dog is really going on one. We're following Evangeline, and Evangeline is someone that believes in hope and love, and she's so naive, and she knows she's naive, but she would rather see the world through these rose-tinted glasses than be negative. And she knows that, and she's willing to admit that. She knows that because of it she's taken advantage of, and she doesn't think things through in the way that things could go wrong. So it makes this a really hopeful, charming read, and our main character is just so lovely. And I think that's what gives me the cozy vibes, is because this is a whimsical fantasy. It's got beautiful magic in, it's like a fairy tale story, almost on the version of being Disney-fied, because of how hopeful everything is. There are stakes, things do go wrong, but also none of it feels really extremely high stakes either. But yeah, I love this series. It's definitely a go-to cozy pick for me, and like I say, it's mainly because of that whimsical feeling in this. So yeah, love this book. Then we have Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, and I loved this book. It was so good. And again, this is bordering on not quite cozy fantasy, because it does have some stakes. It is a bit of a darker cozy fantasy book, but I still really like it. We get that found family trope in this. We're following a main character who has been waiting and waiting for somebody to help her family, to help her sister from this really abusive king that she's married to, and realising nobody is going to help her except her. And it's her grit and determination that goes with this. But she's a really down-to-earth character. She's very much like, I am nothing special. I'm just going to keep trying because I have to. And I love the fact that along the way she ends up with this troop around her that all end up caring for one another, and they come together, like I say, found family, and it's just really good. I really enjoyed it, and while it is darker in places, it still has a cozy vibe to it, which I know sounds weird, but it works really well. We have a demon possessed chicken, which great. We have a bone dog, like a dog made out of bones. And then we've got a fairy godmother. There is so much going on in this book. It's hilarious, and there are moments that are really creepy, but also moments that are really lovely in a slightly darker way. It was a really good time. I really enjoyed this. There are lots of trigger warnings, of course, because of that abusive relationship that she's trying to save her sister from, so do check those out just in case you are triggered by anything. So yeah, this is on the darker spectrum of cozy fantasy, but I still found it very cozy to read, which I don't know what that says about me, but I liked it. And the last book that I've read that I class as cozy fantasy is The Near Witch by V.E. Schwab. This is V.E. Schwab's first book that she ever wrote. I really like it. I think it's lovely. It's not a book that gets spoken about loads. We're following a main character, Lexi. She has been told these stories her whole life, and then this boy comes along and all these bad things start happening, and she's trying to protect this boy so he doesn't get caught up in it. There are witches involved. There is a lot of different cozy things. I think the reason why it feels cozy to me is because it feels like a fairy tale that's being told to you, like a Grimm's fairy tale, and that does feel cozy to me. So that's what this book gives off. It's been a little while since I've read it, so I'm a little bit more vague on all the details. I loved the edges though. Those edges are really, really cool. I normally have it facing out on my shelf to show off those edges, but yeah, this is really lovely, and it is more of that Grimm's fairy tale vibes. We have children that are going missing, there is a hunt to find them, and our main character Lexi's trying to protect this stranger that's come in case he gets blamed for it all. Like I say, I think the coziness just comes from the fact that it is a fairy tale, a darker fairy tale. So these last three aren't ones that would normally be picked out for cozy fantasy, especially with Near Witch and Nettle and Bone being darker, almost a grim fairy tale-esque, and this one just being chosen for purely whimsical vibes. But they are books that I found when I was reading them to be really quite cozy and comforting to read, and I wanted to give that range of not just low stake ones but also a couple that can be seen as darker but still fit the bill. And then, as I said, I wanted to talk about a couple of cozy fantasy books that I want to read. The first one is one that I actually own, and that is Shady Hollow by Juno Black. This is a cozy fantasy murder mystery. We are in Shady Hollow where a murder has happened and all of our characters are animals. I'm really intrigued. I think it's going to be a really good time. I'm looking forward to seeing that mix of fantasy and mystery all wrapped up in coziness, because I love a cozy mystery book and I love a cozy fantasy, so combining those two together just sounds absolutely perfect. It's another short one, and I do know that there is 2 more books in this series, so I'm really intrigued. This one, it says, in the woodland community of Shady Hollow you'll discover a secret. Moose and mice, owls and bears live side by side in civilized harmony. Shady Hollow has a coffee shop and a bookshop and a haberdashery, that word, and a bank. All is well until the town's querulous toad shows up dead. It's something this village hasn't seen before, a murder. Vera Vixen is new in town. She has a nose for news and catches the scent of a story, one that leads her to dark places. As she stirs up the still waters, the fox exposes more than one mystery, and the folks in Shady Hollow learn that some of their neighbours are lying, while others are downright dangerous. It will take all of Vera's cunning and quickness to come out alive. It does sound really good, and again, it's got that slightly darker vibe to it, but also it's got such a bright yellow cover that I don't think it's going to be that dark. Maybe that's just a bit ridiculous, but that's not giving me dark vibes. That's really not. And then there are 2 other books that I don't own. One is Spin in Silver by Naomi Novik. I think this is going to be kind of like on the level with Emily Wild's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I know it's got more of a wintry setting. It's normally a book that's recommended to read in winter, and we have this person that spins silver into gold because her family are pawnbrokers basically, or moneylenders. Her family doesn't like to go out asking for the payments back, and so she takes it into her own hands to go and do that, and she starts making profit, hence spinning silver into gold. The Fae then become really intrigued, and she then has to go off with them, hence the whole relation, I think, possibly to Emily Wild's Encyclopedia of Fairies with the wintry setting and the fairies. That's about it. I haven't read it, so I don't know whether that's a good correlation to have or not, but it does give me potential to be in a cozy fantasy. And then the other book is actually a book that Naomi recommended to me, so thank you, and it's an ebook that's available on Kindle Unlimited. It's called The Wizard's Butler. Let me get up the synopsis. So this is by Nathan Lowell, and it is, for $5 a month and $1 million chaser, Roger Mulligan didn't care how crazy the old geezer is. All he had to do was keep Joseph Perry Shackelford alive and keep him from squandering the estate for a year. They didn't tell him about the pixies. It seems really good. Like, that's really interesting. I'd say I don't know anything more than that, but I have been advised that it's cozy fantasy. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, so I will definitely be giving that one a try, and I will let you know my thoughts. But that is it. So let me know, have you read any of these books, or would you agree that they're cozy fantasy? And do you have any that I haven't mentioned that you think class as cozy fantasy? Put all of that in the comments below. I'd be really eager, especially for some more recommendations. So if you have any, let me know. But thank you so much for watching. So if you have made it this far, then let's put a little coffee or teacup emoji in the comments below. And once again, thank you so much for watching. So if you have enjoyed this video, do give it that thumbs up and subscribe. Comment to let me know that you're here. Those 3 things are so important to helping this channel grow. My social media links will be linked below, and I will of course catch you in the next video.